Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're going to be talking about Florida State versus Alabama. By far the biggest matchup this week. Florida State is a program that has had a lot of success, especially when they had Jameis Winston. And then, of course, Clemson kind of took that title away. But now Florida State still has a ton of talent, and they're going up against Alabama, a juggernaut. By far one of the best, if not the best, college football programs in the last 10 plus years. And I think this is an interesting matchup between these two teams. They have a lot of really good college prospects, lots of overrated ones as well. But I definitely think it's going to be, a game that you should definitely watch. And I'm just going to highlight some of the prospects that you should watch in terms of must-watch prospects versus some guys that you kind of secondary watches, and then just kind of my general thoughts in terms of most of these players. So this is just a general preview of this game. So starting with Florida State specifically, because I think everybody talks about Alabama enough. When it comes to them, the top prospects, must-watch prospects at FSU. One is Derrick Dee, defensive tackle. I think that he has a chance to be a top 5 defensive tackle in this draft class. A guy that has good size, good athleticism, and I think that this is a good matchup because Alabama is known for the offensive line, and there's no bigger test for a guy like this to prove his worth than against that type of offensive line. So I think this is going to be a good game to kind of showcase him against a really tough opponent in terms of offensive line talent, and I think you should definitely watch because of that. And then we get to the secondary. Tavares McFadden at cornerback was one of the guys who had one of the highest pass deflection mark share, or just pass deflection scores last year. Overall, his solo tackle data was kind of low, though. But I do think that he's a talented guy. I do think that he's a guy who shows a lot of interesting sort of things in terms of man skills. And I do kind of wonder, what he does in this game because there's a lot of wide receivers in Alabama, which we'll get to. And I think he has a shot to kind of make a name for himself as well if he has a good game shutting down one of Alabama's wide receivers. Then we get to Derwin James, of course, at safety. He's a guy who had a really good, solid number of games to start the season and then got injured, and then that was it. I really hope he comes back, healthy and stays healthy and puts together a really solid season of production because that's the only real negative. That's the only thing to nitpick Derwin James on because if you just put on the tape and watch him, limited games, but he looks the part in those limited games. It's just that he hasn't been able to string together a full amount of seasons of production, and at least he had 1 year where he was good in terms of solo tackles, but not very good in terms of interceptions and pass deflection data. And I think that this is a year where if he can prove that he can turn the football over and also make plays on the football at a higher percentage, then I think he has a good chance to be a top safety in this class, if not a top 10 player when it's all said and done. Matthew Thomas as well at linebacker is kind of an underrated linebacker. This is a good test for him as well because Alabama has a lot of size in their offensive line, has a lot of size in terms of their fullbacks and their running backs. And this is a good test for linebackers to kind of prove their worth in terms of their ability to take on size and all those other sort of aspects. So Thomas is really a speed linebacker, has some good shed ability, has some good speed, but I definitely think this is a good test for him as well. Then we get to DeAndre Francois, the quarterback there. I ain't gonna lie, guys. This is gonna be a tough game. I hope this isn't like a repeat of Miami last year, where Miami completely destroyed DeAndre Francois, and it's because of the offensive line. Florida State has had issues with their offensive line, and they have not been protecting their guys as well as they can. And if that happens again in this game, that's not gonna do well for him. So I hope he gets a little bit better protection this year, so that he can showcase another guy in Auden Tate at wide receiver. Auden Tate is a fantastic looking wide receiver. I mean, just from a physical standpoint, he looks the part, but has not been able to produce like the part. And I think that this is a big game to kind of show him, going up against Alabama's defensive secondary. which is always, considered to be a tough matchup. So I hope he has a good game as well. And then, of course, we have Ryan Izzo at tight end. He's another guy who's kind of interesting, has a decent frame, decent size, soft hands. He's a tight end prospect to look at as well. And then the last must-watch prospect, which probably should be the first, depending on who you talk to, Cam Akers at running back. Now, Cam Akers is not draft eligible, but he is, from the spring ball game to the game on high school, he looks the part. He basically looks like a smaller version of Leonard Fournette, in terms of his style of play. He's a very physical back. He's fast. He's powerful. And I think that this is a good showcase game for him as well, because Alabama is notorious for its ability to stop the run and stifle running backs. And I think this could be a game that puts him on the map, if he has a good game. So I think Cam Akers is definitely a guy that you should check out at Florida State as well. Then we get to secondary defensive watches. DeMarcus Christmas, Josh Sweat are the other defensive linemen on the team that have not really they've been bigger names than actual prospects at this point, but I do think you should check them out just because, they could have a big game. They could break out this game, so just keep a lookout for them, their names, see what kind of plays they make. And then Trey Marshall is a safety there that maybe the token guy at Florida State this year in terms of that sort of prospect who doesn't really do a ton, but because he plays there, gets a ton of attention. He's kind of like a, we'll take all these guys in the boat. Why don't you take my friend over here kind of thing. But yeah, he's a decent safety. I've seen better safeties. He kind of is a one direction type of safety. He doesn't really move very well. In terms of depth pursuit. So he's very good in terms of coming downhill and hitting, but not very good in terms of backpedaling and going backwards. So that's his only sort of issue. But he's definitely someone to watch because I know that some NFL teams will, give him a lot of opportunities and maybe even draft him because he plays at Florida State. Then we get to Alabama. The top prospect at Alabama to me this year is Mika Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick is a fantastic safety, fantastic DB overall. And I do think that this is a good sort of matchup for him. He could to ball hawk and make plays and stuff like that if they get a lot of pressure, which can happen very quickly. So we'll see what happens. But Minka definitely is a guy that I think you should definitely watch. He's a must-watch player at Alabama. Then, of course, we get to the wide receivers there. Calvin Ridley / Robert Foster. Those are two guys that I think you should definitely watch. They're playing against a fairly decent secondary as well, Florida State, in terms of the other guys that I mentioned. So they're a good matchup sort of situation as well. Check them out. The running backs, Damien Harris and Bo Scarborough. Harris brings a little bit more speed and shiftiness. Scarborough is more so your classic giant running back, Derrick Henry-esque sort of guy, but hasn't exactly produced like Derrick Henry up to this point. But those are two guys that, mandatory watches in this game, especially because the defensive line of Florida State has potential to be very good. So this could be a really good matchup as well in terms of the running backs at Alabama versus Florida State. Then, of course, we get to the D-line. DeSean Han is the guy that's been getting the most buzz and most hype. He's someone that definitely in limited time, he has really good gifts. He has really good moments where he makes a big play and he sheds offensive linemen really well and gets his hands up and knocks down a football. But does he do it consistently? Based on film? No. Based on just production? No. Because he was a rotational guy. So this is going to be his year to actually start full time for the most part. And he has a lot to prove, in my opinion. He has to produce like a special player. If he does, I won't say another negative thing about him ever again. But until he produces like he should, like a very good NFL player does, quality NFL player does, because production does matter. Until he produces like that, I'm still going to have some doubts about him in terms of high quality outcomes, because a lot of people are putting him in the top 10. And I just think that's crazy because he just has not actually started to see how he holds up as a starter. Then we get to the linebacker group. Rashad Evans at linebacker has been a guy who's gotten a lot of buzz there. Limited scenes I've seen of him, he looks decent, but But, and this, of course, is a linebacker core that's had a lot of storied, C.J. Mosley and Reggie Ragland and, of course, Reuben Foster. So Rashad Evans is looking to continue in that tradition. But, again, until he actually does what those other guys do, we'll see. So that's the sort of big thing there. And then the last thing to talk about Alabama is the secondary. Ronnie Harrison, I think, is an underrated safety there. Tony Brown is a cornerback that will get lots of attention. And, of course, Anthony Everett is another guy that I think you should check out as well. Those are guys that definitely will have NFL attention because they're, they're Saban DBs. And, how well they perform this year will say a lot about them. So, yeah, that is Florida State versus FSU. I think it's going to be a good matchup. I don't know if it'll live up to the hype because, this is two teams with very young quarterbacks. Jalen Hurts is coming into his sophomore year. DeAndre Francois is coming into his sophomore year. So these are both two younger teams than usual coming into this. There's not a ton of seniors just hanging around on these teams. It's very young teams, but I do think it's going to be a good matchup, and I do hope that you check out the prospects that I mentioned. And as always, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.